said that you have a Russian soul and you definitely need to go to Moscow. Education, medicine, it's all free and at such a high level. I saw a granny who was carrying bags and she said to me, "Daughter, would you help me please?" I almost burst into tears. When there is a message but no response, you do not know your place in life. You don't feel the meaning of life. The organ culture is very developed in Kaliningrad and in Russia as well. I've even had such a hobby since I was a kid, watching the weather in Moscow. And since he was a Jewish man, he decided to make a little joke. "Do you want $5,000?
Zvezda Holding presents Dynamic Spectrum Talks now.
Hello, dear friends. This is the Dynamic Spectrum Talks podcast. Here we build bridges between countries and continents, between peoples and nations in our difficult times. Actually, there are so many people who think in a sensible, positive and creative way that we can call ourselves the majority. My name is Anna Shafran. This is my colleague Yuri Lindra.
Greetings.
The Russian composer Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky once said, "Music is a treasure chamber into which every nationality contributes to the common benefit." And it's hard to disagree with this because music is a language without words. A universal language through which you can hear the rustle of sakura and the blizzard of the taiga. In our previous episodes, musicians, conductors, violinists came to us, and today we have a guest from Japan. We know that you studied at the Tchaikovsky Conservatory and at the Prince Claus Conservatory in the Netherlands. And you are the recipient of numerous awards, including a very symbolic one, the most sociable, correct, and open to the press. So we are waiting for a very interesting conversation. Hiroko Inoue, a musician and organist, is with us today. Hiroko, we welcome you.
Good morning.
And at the very beginning, of course, we would really like to know your story. This is classic traditional question in our podcast. For Russia, Japan is a very exotic country with a unique culture. And when you see a musician who apparently has been living and working in Russia for quite a long time, who speaks excellent Russian, it is, of course, amazing and very pleasantly impressive. Tell us about yourself.
It is going to be a long story. I've been studying music since childhood, and my sister was also a pianist. And she was very talented, you know. And I kind of stuck out my tail. That is, they didn't really rely on me. Unfortunately, we don't have any music schools in Japan. So, can you imagine how children learn? We go once a week to a piano teacher and play them a program until we get perfect. First, we play etudes, then technical exercises, then classical works, and so on. That's where it ends. There is no systematic education until the age of 18. And I lived like this until I reached 18 years old. And when I finally entered the University of Arts in Kyoto, I thought that I would have a very stormy creative life there, with communication, with teachers about music and arts, and that I would not just play there, but master it. And when I enrolled, I realized, as they say, that was definitely not the case.
It's a good saying.
Yes. It even seemed to me that my life was over. Because when I came to class, the professor told me, piano here, Forte is here, crescendo is here. And at some point, I already stood up and shouted that I understood it myself, the obvious things. So, 6 months later, I changed my teacher. I also couldn't find myself, and after a year, I dropped studying altogether. And then I realized that I just need to take a break in my life. I really need to think about what I want to do. And eventually, I saw a booklet at this university where it was reported that there is a branch of the Moscow Conservatory in Japan. And then I remembered my childhood dream. Well, that is because my father was an English teacher, but at the same time, he was involved in politics. He was a communist, and we had books by Lenin, Engels, and Marx in Japanese in our house. Of course, I haven't read it, but my father believed in this ideology. He even visited the Soviet Union in 1984. And when he returned, he talked about the USSR as a country of music, art and ballet. Education, medicine, it's all free and at such a high level. And then I remembered feeling so sorry for myself. Why am I not there? I want to go to the Central Music School, where children study specifically to become musicians. And I've even had such a hobby since I was a kid, watching the weather in Moscow. Yes, and when I saw minus 20 degrees in Moscow, minus 30, I thought to myself, well, how do children learn like this? And at the same time, it felt like I was missing something in my life. That's what I remembered, and I thought, let's go to this professor who walks in the branch. And he turned out to be a wonderful professor, Alexander Semetsky. And I was preparing for the audition myself, since I was no longer studying at the university. So I went to him and I played my program. To my surprise, he said a phrase that became a key one for me. He said that you have a Russian soul and you definitely need to go to Moscow.
Fantastic.
I do not know what kind of Russian soul and where he did hear it from, and it's really very mysterious when it comes to the Russian soul, so it's amazing for me. But so was it, and in 1998, having no acquaintances and knowing only 2 words, thank you, спасибо, and goodbye, до свидания, I went to study in Russia.
It's an amazing story. And to be honest, your Russian with participle and adverbial phrases is perfect. How do you manage it? Props to you.
Japanese, I think, will be no less difficult for us.
I've never even thought about touching it because I know it's absolutely impossible to me.
Let's continue the topic of your move to Russia. We know that you didn't arrive in Moscow right away. First it was Kaliningrad, the Baltic Sea, the Amber region. Why Kaliningrad? After all, this is the most western point of Russia, the farthest from Japan. How did it happen?
It turned out to be very interesting. The fact is that I studied in Moscow for 8 years. And, of course, Russia is a piano school. That is, as a pianist, I came at all. And the piano school in Russia is generally the top in the world. There are so many wonderful teachers and pianists in the 20th and 21st centuries. So I got to the legendary professor, a student of Konstantin Nikolaevich Igumnov, who studied with Zloty, and he studied with Franz Liszt. So it's a very lengthy tradition. Thus, I studied for 8 years, and at the same time, I wanted to study the organ. How did it happen? For me, the organ was a very distant instrument. It had always been closed in my life. He looked at me hauntingly on the balcony of the church, and I honestly thought I would never play this instrument. But I fanatically loved and keep loving the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. And the organ and Bach are inextricably linked. Well, because Bach wrote a lot of opuses for the organ and was an excellent organist himself, and one day, at the conservatory, I heard the voice of the organ passing by the Rachmaninoff Hall, and something flashed in my mind. I got practically an insight. I immediately went to class, and there I saw my future teacher. Well, I didn't know when this would be the first place for me, but I realized that the organ is actually close to my life, and I can learn on this majestic instrument. And when I saw my future teacher and stayed in that class, in that moment I realized that this was what I had missed in my life. Alexei Alexandrovich Parshin can be called a God-blessed teacher. He is a wonderful teacher because he could show and explain something that is basically inexplicable. It is very difficult to put into words all the techniques that he taught me, but his creativity, art, and energy were all things he could tell, show, and pass on to us, the students. And that was how my organ session started. And 2 years later, the piano professor called me and said, I went to Kaliningrad, played 2 Chopin concerts there in one evening, and I met the muse of Mikhail Leonovich Terivedev, Vera Terivedeva. So she's organizing a big organist competition. And since he was a Jewish man, he decided to make a little joke. Do you want $5,000? I told him right away, of course I want to. And he immediately dictated the entire program over the phone. First round, second round, third round. I realized that this was a huge amount, but I really wanted to participate. That's how I got into Mikhail Terivedev organist competition. I think that most people probably know Mikhail Terivedev primarily as a film composer. He has written music for so many movies. But, in fact, he has a number of organ compositions as well. He even wrote a symphony. It's called Chernobyl.
This is a discovery for me. I didn't know.
He went there after the catastrophe. The first part is called Zone, such a realistic picture. And the second part is called Quo Vadis, the biblical phrase meaning, where are you going? And there are incredible images. A soul that is gradually departing to cosmos. So, I was there in Kaliningrad for the first time in 2005. And to be honest, I do not know how I got to the finals, because I still had no experience. My creativity and my skills have even received recognition and several awards. The audience award was especially important to me, and honestly, I remember saying one simple phrase to the organ tuner of the Kaliningrad Regional Philharmonic. His name was Mikhail Nikolaevich Korneev. I said to him, what happiness it is for an organist to work in such a place. And this simple phrase reached the ears of his superiors. Can you imagine that? 2 weeks later, I received a call. Do you really want a job with us? We have a very small salary. And I didn't even ask how much, but immediately agreed. And for the last 20 years, I've been working as a soloist of the Kaliningrad Philharmonic, and 10 years of my profession with a child who was born in Kaliningrad. And to teach him, we decided to return in Moscow in 2015, and we have lived here ever since.
What are your impressions of Kaliningrad? It's a unique place.
Of course, this is a very unique place. This is the former East Prussia, the German land. And it's very consonant with the organ, very consonant. Yesterday, I counted how many organs there are in Russia. It turned out that there are 127 wind organs in total, and 10 of them are located in Kaliningrad. That's saying something. The fact that the organ culture is very developed in Kaliningrad and in Russia as well. And one of them, the one which stands in the Kant Cathedral, is the largest organ in Russia.
Well, you have each answer as a separate symphony, a balm for the soul of a Russian person. It's so interesting to listen to. And most importantly,
I didn't know much, I admit.
We make discoveries for ourselves. Hiroko, you are a woman who has crossed both cultural and geographical boundaries. You were born in Japan. Please tell us about something, if possible, to recall the most vivid or perhaps fateful event that happened to you here in Russia, and perhaps left a mark in your heart.
Well, there were a lot of small events that touched me to the core. I remember when I was a student, one winter I was walking down the street and I saw a granny who was carrying bags, and she said to me, "Daughter, would you help me please?" And to be honest, I almost burst into tears. And then I realized that I just want to be here on this earth with which you have a consonance, some sort of response, and where you feel your life. Because, if I'm being honest, in Japan it was quite difficult for me to get this feeling at all. And here it is a completely different situation.
This feeling is called heartiness.
Maybe. Yes, it is a response. That is, of course, you can be talented, you can be a good person, but I just had a feeling of vacuum. When there is a message but no response, you do not know your place in life. You don't feel the meaning of life. And I would probably generalize that this is a big problem now in modern Japan, when everyone is separate from each other. You know, a lot of people, young people, they just sit at home and don't feel any perspective when they're not
communicating.
Yes.
By the way, there is a trend that has been written about quite a lot lately. It turns out that in Japan, in large cities, appear specific subcultures where young people not only do not communicate with their peers, they don't appear anywhere, and even relatives often don't know what's going on with them.
There is such a problem. They just live in a room. Mom brings food out to the door, leaves it, and leaves herself. What does this mean? And another sad topic. I'm sorry to have to say this, but we have a lot of suicides. It would seem that this was a very prosperous country, But in recent years, at least 20,000 people have been dying on their own every year. This number used to be even bigger.
So it's still relevant.
Relevant, yes.
And probably most of these 20,000 are not people who have already outlived their days, but those who have not yet been able to find their place in life.
Yes, that's why they're leaving, alas.
How interesting the 21st century and this postmodernity, which offers mankind huge problems of various kinds. They may differ in each country, but for many countries they are similar. This applies to demographics, the birth of children and so on, and in general, this is such a challenge for humanity.
I believe that this is the excess of comfort, of some material things. Of course, I may be mistaken, but I think there was some kind of experiment at some point that was called Universal 42. Am I right?
Yes. When a group of mice were fed, watered, cared for, and eventually they degenerated, right?
All this time, while we are talking, I've been sitting and thinking, after all, Hiroko absolutely passes for a Russian person, because we have regions like Udmurtia, Yakutia, Bashkiria, and Buryatia, where the anthropological type of face is very similar to what your Japanese look like.
A native of Russia.
A native for Russia, for us, yes. You walk down the street and no one has any questions.
And the quality of the Russian language,
It's better than some Russian people speak.
Yes, I guess I've been Russified for a long time. And I really like that the word Russians does not characterize a specific nation, but has a unifying meaning. And what does this Russians contain? This is the spirit, the soul, and the inner state. And I really do hope that I feel like a true Russian.
it turns out that Russians are super ethnos, which serves as an umbrella. It's a kind of common basis that is shared by the majority of the indigenous people of Russia. They consider themselves Russians on a global scale. They can really be divided there into Udmurts or Buryats or Tatars.
Russian Tatar, Russian Georgian, Russian Armenian, and so on.
It is a set of the same general values, ideas about life and feelings of life, and this unites us. And we are very glad that we have you now too, Russian, Japanese. Hiroko, but I still want to continue the topic of Japan. It is interesting to me from what point of view. When I was little, animated series and toys were just beginning to enter our popular culture, and many of them were from Japan. I grew up watching two animated series, Grandizer and Robotech. Then the Transformers toys appeared, and for us, for my generation, I'm 40 years old, all this Japanese stuff was such excitement, such a great interest. The first consoles play on TV like Dendy, Nintendo. It was a dream come true. For us, the Japanese way of life seemed to be kind of locomotive, an incentive to do something, because it was like a whole huge new world that we wanted to explore. But you just said that now, on the contrary, young people in Japan are lost. In other words, the culture that motivated us largely serves as such as a demotivator for modern Japanese youth. What do you think is the reason?
I'm probably going to repeat myself again, but this is a comfortable life, where, in general, there is no need to communicate with people. Even when faced with some problems, there is simply a choice of ready-made solutions for you. For example, take the state exam. There are questions there, and you can choose from the ready-made answers. You don't even have to think for yourself. I believe that this all leads to the fact that this communication is stopped. And then happens, what is it called when everyone is on their own in their own capsule?
Separation, yes, division.
Yes, and it doesn't lead to anything good.
In the scientific community, it is called an atomization of society, the disintegration of society into the smallest particles, into individuals. And when people stop communicating, it's harder for them to make friends. And young people do not know how to raise children because they themselves were not socialized at one time. And so we get a set of problems that lead to degeneration.
By the way, since we've touched on this topic, it's interesting that there is virtually no migration in Japan on the scale of countries with insufficient populations and demographic problems. Naturally, some problems also exist in Russia. And why there's no migration in Japan? Does robotics solve this problem?
No, not really. After all, we have a very big problem that the nation is currently aging, and there is a big demographic problem. You know, 1 in 4 Japanese is over 60 years old. This is a rather elderly society.
Every fourth Japanese resident is over 60 years old.
Yes, that's a huge amount. But also we have 3.5 million migrants, which is honestly a lot.
And where are the migrants from?
From East Asia, Thailand, Vietnam, because we are very short of manpower, especially in medicine. It is necessary to take care of the elderly. And maybe, of course, due to difficulties with mastering the Japanese language, the flow of migrants has been slowing down, and the number of newcomers is definitely not comparable to what we see in the West.
But nevertheless, you have migrants too.
Yes, we do.
We must bear in mind that they are coming from a kindred region. And secondly, there are 150 million and 3.5 million migrants in Japan, which is not a catastrophic ratio, as for example in the UK or Germany.
The ratio is completely different.
Yes, besides we know that your level of automation and robotization is amazing. For example, at the Toyota plant, the world's largest machine manufacturer, 75% of the production process is carried out by robotic manipulators. Yes, a lot of people work, but they work on servicing robots. But, pardon me, the knots are tightened directly by electronic manipulators.
Yes, that's probably what the world is coming to. You know, AI is being implemented in many areas, and that is the fact that we have to live with. For us, organists, the last week of July and the last week of March are very important weeks, because it is the time of Bach's birth and Bach's death. And I played 2 concerts at the end of July. We had a wonderful festival called Bach Worship in Kaliningrad. Indeed, the artists have to pay tribute to the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. I performed there with the wonderful countertenor Artyom Krutko. And I went to Kaliningrad, and then I went from Kaliningrad to Homeland and played a whole monographic program with the wonderful musician. His name was Jean-Pierre Stuvers. Now I'm back, and a new season has begun. And tomorrow I am flying to Arkhangelsk, Murmansk, Kaliningrad, and then Volgograd. And until the middle of January, I will be in such a very intense mode with various programs, wonderful musicians, and even not only in Russia, but also abroad. For example, we will have concerts in Israel.
It turns out, based on the density of the schedule and the large number of concerts you and other musicians have, that the rumors that classical music is heading towards its decline are, to put it mildly, exaggerated. The demand for good, high-quality music is always stable. So, pop music, pop art, heavy metal, rock, it's all.
It's all transitory.
And this is something eternal that has lived, lives, and will live for centuries.
Of course, I'm sure of it. But I would like to point out that organs in Russia, especially concert organs, are of great value. And maybe I'll put it bluntly, but the organ has become a very popular instrument in Russia. If we compare it with Europe, then in Europe there are magnificent centuries-old organ masterpieces, which are 90% performed in churches, not in concert halls. But when you play there are basically no young people in the audience. People have somehow pushed away from the church. And when it comes to the organ, there is always a connection with churches, cathedrals, and religion.
Because it's clerical music.
Yes, of course, even in concert halls, the organ remains a religious instrument. As academician Albert Schweitzer, another remarkable organist, said, its clerical spirit cannot be taken away. But I think we need to bring balance to the programs we play and play different things. Film music, anime music, and rock music, for example, are also being played on the organ. But it still remains all about the spiritual. I would say, especially after the pandemic period, when the interest in live communication has increased.
We felt again how important it is.
Yes, and for us too.
Live chat and live music, no recordings, concerts from the TV screen, but to feel goosebumps running down the skin.
That's right, yes.
You talk so fascinatingly about the organ music that I remembered my childhood in Tver. I studied at a music school, and of course we all had a subscription to the Tver Philharmonic. And when the organ hall opened, it was quite an event. And I remember those concerts. These were my favorite organ concerts. I remember Harry Grodberg was one of those musicians who came to Tver quite often to give concerts. I realized what I lack in life for happiness. I haven't been to an organ concert in a long time, by the way.
Let me invite you.
You also need to install a home organ.
You know, I have 3 organs at home.
Really?
I just sleep and live under the organ. Everyone is surprised. Of course, I rent apartments, but yes, I do have 3 organs at home.
Amazing. It seemed to me that the organ was really something very mystical. It's such a majestic instrument. And by the way, I got an opportunity once when my school and I went on a friendly exchange trip to Germany, to the city of Osnabrück. I ended up in a host family where a relative was an organist musician, and I asked to go on an excursion to the church where she served and asked for the opportunity to play. Because at that very moment I was studying at a music school and playing Bach, and it was such an indescribable feeling to play Bach on the organ in the church. Hiroko, we are already nearing the end of our program. In our Dynamic Spectrum Talks podcast, we find common ground between different peoples and cultures. We talked about this at the beginning, but many people believe that Japan and Europe, Russia and Asia are completely different planets. But you have been living in Russia for more than 20 years. Do you see anything in common between the Russian and Japanese soul, although we have already mentioned the differences? Or, on the contrary, are these planets so different that they begin to attract as opposites?
It's hard to say. There is a state, there are nations, there is a mentality. There is always something with every country, with every nation. Something similar, something different.
What do you think Russians and Japanese have in common? What can connect us?
If I may say so, it's a kind of soulful nostalgia, so to say. Well, for example, there are a lot of sad happenings in Japanese fairy tales or cartoons, right? And the fairy tales end very sadly. We don't usually have a happy ending.
It's only a happy ending for Americans. We have instructive stories. Don't do that, otherwise it will be like in a fairy tale.
Yes, I agree with you.
Russian music is so touching for us. It's minorality. For example, the second concert of Rachmaninoff's third concert. The third theme is such a simple melody, but it is so heartfelt it causes this nostalgia. From where? I don't know. Probably this is a mystery of the Russian soul.
How interesting and exciting it is. I thought it was a difficult question, and your answer was so surprising.
It turns out that if you understand and feel the music, then you can, as they say, decode the Russian soul. And many, especially Westerners, have been struggling with this for centuries and cannot understand it. And what is that? Because they no longer play classical instruments.
But by the way, the end of our conversation, of course, once again confirmed the very idea that Russia and Asia, the Eastern peoples, have much more in common in terms of worldview, the way we look at the world, less pragmatically and somehow more deeply.
Yes, I agree.
Hiroko, thank you so much for this very interesting conversation. Hiroko Inoue, organist, was with us today on Dynamic Spectrum Talks podcast. We sincerely wish you every success on your path.
See you soon!
Thank you so much.
Till next time!
Zvezda Holding presents Dynamic Spectrum Talks. Now.